2025, this is the message where I'm supposed to really push you into the next year. I'm supposed to challenge you. I'm supposed to say, hey, you need to look at your spiritual life and make sure you're reading the Bible every day. You're coming to church all the time, every time the doors are open. I'm not doing that today. Don't worry if you feel guilty. Don't. It's not my intent. But I do want to look at 2025 and the idea that whatever you're afraid of going into that year is going to stall you out. Because that fear is going to stand between you and whatever God's calling is for you. And I think we all have different callings. I think everyone in this room has a calling on their life. But fear will paralyze us. It'll keep us to do the safe. And we have fears of the unknown, fears of past trauma sometimes, fear of rejection. It's easy to stay on the safe side many times. It's not very exciting. And it's not really scriptural either. When we read, we read in 2 Timothy that God hasn't given you a spirit of fear, but one of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear tries to keep us into the familiar. But God's promises and our faith in God can open up a whole new world. And we can enter that world with courage and with trust. Now, in the last few weeks, I've talked about this story a few times, and it's the story of the 12 spies. Anyone remember where that's at in the Bible? Exodus, Joshua. We're going to say Numbers. We're going to say Numbers. We're going all over today. But we spent most of our time in Numbers. But we are stepping back into Exodus. Becca, you were right on that. You have the Bible app up?
I do.
She has my notes up. She's on it. So we're going into the story. And if you remember that story, there were Joshua and Caleb, and they went against everyone else in that nation. But here's why. We're going to step back to Exodus. Exodus 33:11 says, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. He stayed. He stayed to get more of God. Have you ever stayed to get more of God? Have you ever lingered in God's presence? It's so easy in society to rush in and rush out and to do the next thing, but Joshua didn't do that. Now, I'm assuming that he had work to do. He was the aide of number one man in charge. But he lingered in the presence of God. We read in the book of John where we are told to abide. And that's really what he's doing here, is he's abiding in the presence. So he stays in this tent after Moses leaves, demonstrating that there's a hunger for God's presence in his life. Doing that, he prioritizes his time. And as he prioritizes his time, he's preparing his life for that chapter in Numbers 13 and 14. Because in Numbers 13 and 14, you may remember the story. There's spies sent out, 12 spies sent out to look. They come back, they give a report. Moses is very specific on what he wants. They come back. 10 of the spies are like, no, there's giants. We look like grasshoppers. And then Joshua and Caleb are like, well, maybe the grasshoppers need to eat the giants. Yeah, they were like, hey, let's do this. We've seen God deliver us. We have faith in God. God told us that we can do this, so let's do it. They remain faithful, urging the whole nation that you can take this land. This is the land that God gave us. Let's take the land. So they have this courage and they have this faith. But what happens? They don't win the argument. They don't. We've seen that Joshua, he spent time in God's presence and he trusted in God's promises, but he could not get the nation to overcome their fear. So Moses didn't get to go in. So then we fast forward again to the book of Joshua. So if you have your Bibles, you can go to that chapter. And I'm going quickly here, but you can read this on your own. Numbers 14, before I go there, I want you to hear this. It says, Numbers 14, this is Joshua, only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. But the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. You see, he had faith because he had spent that time in the presence of God. And he had remembered the victories that they had coming out of Egypt. But Joshua was the guy that followed Moses. Have you ever followed someone in your job that was really good at what they did? And you had to step into their shoes? And you're like, I don't know if I can do that. Sometimes that's a very difficult thing. And I think that Joshua had to feel that a little bit, because a lot of times we don't remember the next person who followed Michael Jordan, who followed Wayne Gretzky, who followed Barry Sanders. Someone did. Who followed Moses? Joshua. You know why? Because we're in Joshua chapter 1. In Joshua chapter 1, we see that Moses had died, and Joshua he's basically talking to God. We're going to read through this together. So 1 through 9, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I am about to give them, to the Israelites. Now, this was not a little thing. The Jordan River wasn't like walking through some little creek. We're going to read later, that's flood stage, so it's really high. Now, if I'm Joshua, I'm thinking, okay, Moses did the Red Sea, now you've got me on the Jordan. This is a big deal. We're going to go on. I'll give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert of Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Verse 7, be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all the law of my servant Moses has given you. Do not turn from it from the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips and meditate on it day and night, so you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. What's the theme there? Be strong and courageous. We see it over 3 times, 4 verses. Strong and courageous. Moses, Joshua, I know you're following Moses, but I need you to go into that land. And to go into that land, you need to be strong and courageous. Hebrew sounds like this. Rock, Shashak. Can you say that? Rock, Shashak. Now, when they started saying that, that was like a battle cry. And that was their battle cry of the Israelites. And it started here. Be strong and courageous. And sometimes I think we need a battle cry in our life because we get lost in the life. And I think that Joshua, even though he had done great things at this point even, I think that there was some doubt, and he needed that battle cry. Because if you've ever been in a state where you're trying to get pumped up, we're trying to put your game face on, a lot of times you need to say something. You usually don't sit there quiet, do you? No. Think about if a team is winning and your team is losing and you're like that person, you're like, I want to start the chant. Let's go. Whatever it is, right? And then it catches on, and then it goes. And it's encouraging, and that's what this was. It was an encouraging battle cry. It gave them oomph. It embodied the idea that God was with them in the middle of a battle. So when they used it, it filled their hearts with courage. It improved their attitude. Do you ever need your attitude improved? All right. So next time you need your attitude improved, rock, shashak. So let's go on, though. Joshua. Chapter 3. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at full flood stage during the harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped. Stopped. It's a miracle. You see, Joshua led Israel to cross the river, this dangerous thing. But he did that because he was trusting in the promises of God. But it took action. He couldn't stop and just say, yeah, I believe you. He had to be strong and courageous and get things moving. And he obeyed. But he did that because he had the time with God to start with. This wasn't like he woke up one day. He's like, oh, I'm going to cross the Jordan. Come on, guys. David didn't wake up and kill Goliath. He had battles before that. He fought the lion and the bear. And he says that. If you read 1 Samuel, he's like, yeah, I did this. I can do that. God is with me. We have to think that David may have even had a battle cry similar to this, because this was a battle. Joshua 4. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan. Why does God tell them to pick up stones? He tells them to pick up stones as a memorial so that they remembered that God was faithful. So he established this memorial as to show future generations. So when they look back, they say, you know what? God was faithful. He provided for us. He took care of us in the hardest times. When we were full of doubt. When 10 out of the 12 experts said, don't do this. And God said, go ahead. And we took a risk. We stood for what was right. And then God used them in a mighty way. And because of that, they were able to make a memorial. They would not have made a memorial if they didn't go there. You realize that. There would have been nothing to look back on. This is why we share the stories of God with our families and with our kids. Parents, your kids need to know how God is alive in your life, because you're pointing to the memorial where God did battle for you, where you trusted in God, and you came out okay. So when they crossed the Jordan, he set up this memorial. In chapter 4, it reads like this. It says, each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? What do these stones mean here? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. You see, in the Old Testament, stones were physical structures or physical reminders to commemorate special events. Sometimes encounters with God, sometimes divine deliverance. But they served as a tangible reminder for the people to remember that God was faithful. Because have you noticed in your life that sometimes it's easy to remember that God is faithful? Like he got you through a victory, and then the next one, you're like, where's God? I don't know, God, are you going to help me with this one too? That's easy to do. But when we have things set up, we have memorials set up, that's why he did this. Because it instructs future generations about his work. And one thing that God is about, he's always about the next generation. He is. He's about the next generation learning about the goodness and the faithfulness of God and living in that path. So these stones were memorials, and we see them in Israel. And you can, I think I have a picture on my slides. Did I have a slide picture? Yeah. So this is one, there's all different kinds, but when someone would walk by in this culture, they would say, hey, Rabbi, what is this? Why is this stone here? And they say, well, this is when we crossed the Jordan. Now, this is not that. So if you're wondering how they carry those on their shoulders, don't worry about that. I didn't have that picture. But they say, hey, can you tell me that story? Can you tell me how God was faithful in this instance? It's not unlike if you have a friend or someone you've grown close to and you see a scar on their hand, you're like, hey, can you tell me about that scar? Well, that was the time my brother decided to just beat me up. I used to have those. They faded now. We all have them from each other. One of my favorite things to do when I meet someone new, if they have a tattoo, is I'm like, tell me about that tattoo. Like, can you unpack that for me? Because it tells part of their story. We see that in other things too, where we see a history of something with someone and we're like, hey, can you tell me that story? That's what these are doing. They're telling the story of God. Now, I don't expect you to start setting up stones in your driveway. If you do, I'm cool with that. But if we look at the New Testament, we see that Peter kind of changed his mind on the stone thing a little bit. And it's 1 Peter. He's explaining that believers, you and myself, we're actually living stones. And we reflect God through our actions. 1 Peter 2. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You see, church, our lives should prompt other people to ask, what happened here? Why are you like that? What happened? You were different. You're not like everybody else. And then that creates an opportunity to say, and you can tell them about your Jordan River or your whatever it is. But that's what we're called to be. Goes on in the next chapter, and it reads like this, says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now, often we think we need to give a reason for everything that's in the Scripture. I don't read that like that. I read it like, why are you different? What did God do in your life? Why? What's your secret? My secret is Jesus. My secret is Jesus. That's the hope. That's the answer you've got to be ready for that because it's very easy to say, well, I just grew up with manners. I'm just a nice person. Some of you are. Some of you aren't. Some of you, that's easier. Oh, I don't know. I don't know why I'm nice. Some of you are nice because of Jesus Christ. You need to tell people that. I'm nice because of Jesus. I will tell you that. That's a true story. So I know a couple other of you. You agree. And you know, and you're the same way. Jesus has softened my heart. Jesus has changed my life. Peter wanted his readers to think of themselves as living, standing stones as memorials to God. So that as they faithfully followed God, they would have victories. And as they had victories, they'd have testimonies. But if you stay in fear, you won't have a victory and you won't have a testimony, and then you can't share your hope. The world needs hope. The world needs God. I understand that you have hurt. I understand that you have challenges, but I also know that you have hope and you have testimonies. So my question for you this morning is, what is your battle cry for 2025? I think the Jetsons were out in 2025. I think that was George Jetson, right? Maybe it was earlier. Seems crazy to say 2025. But in 25, Jetsons or no Jetsons, some of you will be facing some serious life changes. Some of you will have children. Some of you will lose people in your life. Some of you will be facing death in 2025. Some of you will face health issues. Some of you will realize that it's finally time to deal with my addictions. Some of you will realize it's finally time for me to talk to somebody about the way I don't like myself. How this life is not the life that I expected, and I don't know what to do because I feel like I'm drowning. Some of you may have to deal with behaviors that you have just kept playing with for years. Now, all of those things that I just mentioned, you can fall back and stay safe. You stick your head in the ground, or you can say, I want to be strong and courageous. Rock, Shashak. Some of you will find yourself needing the courage to leave a relationship. Some of you will find the courage to start a new relationship, start a new job. Some of you will actually start a budget, I guess, because you need to do that. Tell your money where to go. And then there's some of you, and I pray this is all of you, will step into the calling that God has for you. When your back is against the wall in 2025, what is your battle cry? I can't, or he can. You see, our world, our community is desperate, and that's not even the right word. I don't have the verbiage for that, to see a church that is contagious, that is thriving, a church that actually lives beyond itself and chooses the right thing over the easy thing. A church that has the strength and the courage to say, no matter what happens, we will trust in God.